Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. And I've got a fantastic guest for you today, Shana Meyerson. And she talks about, she's a speaker, she's a coach. For the audience, she's going to be great for talking about mindfulness. She's a yoga practitioner, and I'm really happy to have her on the show. So, Shana, welcome. Start off by talk about your background, your story, and we'll dive right into it.
Okay. My background is I came to yoga on accident. Really, quite literally, I came to yoga on accident. I was a consummate athlete and I had an accident. I'm not like that kind of accident. I was walking around my apartment and I broke my toe. It wasn't like a super dramatic accident, but it was dramatic enough that I couldn't do the athletic things that I was used to doing. So I was coerced by the universe to try this stupid yoga thing. This was August of 2001, very shortly before 9/11, and a few weeks. And let's just say it was a message that was sent to me from the universe at just the right time. And though I came to it kicking and screaming, it spoke to me on such a visceral level that I honestly knew right away that this was something that I needed to be dedicating myself to. And I'm very highly educated. I'm an Ivy League grad. I was getting my MBA at UCLA at the time. I had a successful career with some very large and powerful organizations. And I was like, I'm leaving it all. I want to teach yoga. I want to change the world in that little way. And here I am. That was 22 and a half years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really transformative story. And usually the guests in the audience, they have something and it triggers and inspires. So talk about what is it about the practice that helps you to improve and that helps you to help clients?
Sure. Let me just say, first of all, that the reason why I did leave my career and in a way, my education, it's not really my education, it's my formal education, but honestly, like the path of yoga is an education of itself because it's a life education that never ends. But like the real kernel that made me shift it all was I walked into yoga weeks before my 30th birthday. I wasn't like a very young person. And it was the first time in my entire life that anybody ever told me it was okay to fall. Literally, the first time. And as a lifelong perfectionist, that was such a profound revelation. That was like the driving force that told me more people need to know the secret that we can fall up instead of falling down. And so my teaching, so I have sort of two very like polar aspects to my teaching. On one end, I have Mini Yogis Yoga for Kids, which is my children's program, which I started in March of 2002, way before yoga for kids was a thing, like decades before it was a thing. Now it's ubiquitous. Like you can't find a kid that doesn't practice yoga. But in 2002, believe me, what is now ubiquitous back then was ridiculous. So that's like dealing with children, right? As young as 2.5 years old. On the other end of the spectrum, I have my yoga athletica practice, which is the most challenging yoga practice you could possibly imagine. Lots of handstands, arm balances, contortions, like the stuff of legends, right? And, but honestly, like the lesson is the same. It doesn't matter where my students are on the continuum. And I work with everybody. I work with kids who are doing the crazy handstands. I work with adults who want to lie on the floor all day and really don't want to do the intense stuff. Like I work with it all. But the kernel is the same. And the kernel is learning to accept yourself, learning to accept your process, but never getting complacent with it. Right. So always pressing your edges, always looking to be better, but at the same time, that weird confluence of I'm always doing my best and I always accept that my best is my best.
Interesting. Yeah, I love that. It's almost like a spiritual practice, and there's also physical benefits. One thing is it's really interesting because you don't realize until you like move your body in certain ways that you're like holding on to like chronic patterns, or like your body's holding on to these habitual patterns of tension. One question is, because you talked about perfectionism and how yoga helped you to let go of that. So how does ego hold us back from our full potential?
That's such an interesting question because there's a nuance to that answer that I think most people don't understand. So let's start with the obvious, okay? The obvious is our typical definition of ego, right? And the typical man on the street, woman on the street is going to associate ego with egotism, meaning self-absorption, putting yourself ahead of others, etc. And so most people, when they think of ego with yoga, they think of the person at the front of the class who's doing all the things that nobody else is doing and is, look at me, I'm amazing. And they're on the all over social media and they're just so wrapped up in the performance aspect, which quite frankly is not a real aspect of yoga. That was never intended to be a piece of yoga.
Mhm.
And this performative and even over sexualization of what is meant to be a very spiritual practice is very egotistically driven. Okay. But here's the flip side that most like just pedestrian humans who just walk into a yoga studio and roll out a mat and roll it up and go home don't understand is that the flip side of ego, and when I say flip side, I don't mean the opposite of. I mean, it is the same coin, it's just the other side of the coin, is that when people get overly concerned with their ego, they become afraid to fail because they don't want to look stupid. And so what happens is there's the person who's amazing and can do all the crazy things, and they are in the front of the class. But the person who also has an overinflated ego is the one hiding in the back of the class and not even trying because they're afraid of failing or looking stupid.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's just like when you put one thing that the whole experience, I encourage people to, because it's just, but the whole experience is like you're hot and sweaty and just so many people. And it's like, you just actually, you have to drop your ego, you have to drop your, and just go. And then it's just, then you have people that are fitter, skinnier, prettier, stronger, all this, and you just have to let it go. And just, and you talk about not being afraid to fall, and just it's really interesting. The other question I have for you is, a lot of people, they're stuck in their jobs, or 9 to 5s, or corporate jobs. They've got these
Or
nice pedigrees and they actually want to do something like you, like be a yoga teacher or a coach. Or so how do you leave your job and follow your dream? What do you tell clients?
yeah. And that's a very interesting question because some people really resonate with my response and some people get really pissed about it. So here's my response. Not everybody is meant to do in life that which they love.
Mhm.
Okay. So there are hobbies and there are callings.
Mhm.
And so I think that a lot of hobbyists, and I could say yoga, it doesn't matter. It could be pottery, it could be stamp collecting. It doesn't matter what it is. They love the doing, right? Don't necessarily have the skills or even the passion for making it a profession. Okay. So in yoga, we'll say teaching, but if it's stamp collecting, like trading, like I'm not a stamp collector, but I do collect, like I like tchotchkes, like little things. And the thought of getting that one stamp that's worth $1 million or whatever and selling it, that's not in every stamp collector's wheelhouse. Some people just want it enshrined or in a safe or whatever. So that's like that example. So in yoga, I think that particularly now, I'm going to be honest, since the pandemic, the yoga industry has taken a hard pivot towards free content. What does that mean for a yoga instructor? You better love this or you're in real trouble because it's not necessarily the huge money making machine that it became, let's say, in the decade leading up to the pandemic, about the 2010, 2012 to maybe 2020 when everything crashed. In order to take the leap, here's what's interesting. So I used to work in Hollywood in the film industry. I worked at ICM, which is at the time it was the number 2 agency in the world. Now the agency system has gotten a little bit weird, but it's still like top 3 agencies, if not still probably number 2. And why was I there? I was there because I wanted to be a screenwriter. Okay, now let me connect the dots. In LA, there's this big backdoor policy of, like, the old joke is that every waitress in LA is really an actress trying to wait on the right producer. Of course, now that has shifted, honestly, into yoga instructor, but that's just a weird irony of confluence in this conversation. Because the real point of what I was going to say is, why was I at ICM? Because I wanted to be a writer, but I wasn't willing to give up everything to be a writer. Instead, I'm like, what if I go to Hollywood? I work at a powerful agency. I meet the agents, the producers, the directors, the writers. I meet all the people. Then I got into script development, which, for people who don't understand what script development is, it's like what it would be the analogy to a book editor, meaning you're helping people rewrite. And I'm like, my writing was something I did on the side. Right, that I'm like, okay, maybe I'll write a screenplay that will hit, but in the meantime, I need to make ends meet, right? And so, was that a calling? Listen, I do believe I'm a good writer. Obviously, it wasn't a calling because I wasn't willing to give up everything to do it. When yoga came into my life, the most simply put way is that I could explain it is, at the time, the average yoga instructor was earning something around $17,000 a year. Now, keep in mind, I had just come out of Microsoft. I know I'm leaving out some time in between Hollywood and my tech career or whatever, but I'm like, I may shift literally into poverty wages by making this shift. And I'm leaving my MBA program, which I just spent an inordinate amount of money on, and it's my education. Like, this is important stuff. But it made so much sense to me that the universe was like, this is just what you need to do. That I was in retrospect, I'll say I was willing to take the leap, but I could tell you, going back into my mind 23 years ago, it didn't feel like a leap. It felt, again, like a calling. So what I would say to answer your question is, not everything you love is your calling. When the call comes, answer it, and you'll know when it comes. I hope you'll know when it comes.
Yeah, that's very powerful, and I really love that when the because and I love this idea because not everybody is going to have to, follow your path. I know, I had a lot of previous guests. She was a doctor, and then her calling was to be a coach, teaching physicians how to, live and travel anywhere and be a like digital nomad. And but not, not all everybody is supposed to do that. Which I really love that, and I love that quote that you said when it comes, knows. So how do you, I think we have around 2, 3 minutes, and how can people find you and check out your work and maybe sign up for a yoga class with you or coaching call? How do they find out more about you?
Yeah, the easiest way to find me, honestly, is on my website, which is Yoga Athletica. And I'll spell it because it's weird. It has only one A in the middle. So it's YOGATHLETICA.com. All of my social media links, including my mini yogis program, everything is linked there. My handstand breakthrough program is there. And I do teach privately, both live in LA and on Zoom.
Yeah, really interesting. And I know during the pandemic, there was a lot of basically YouTube. You could go to YouTube and a lot of yoga instructors doing that. So kudos to you. And I really enjoyed this conversation. And for the
Thank
audience, be
you.
sure to check out all of Shauna's resources. And thanks so much for an enlightening episode.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your inviting me.